Up next in the broadcast, militants in Iraq continue their conquest of more territory as their tactics reportedly get bloodier. South Korean nationals, the government says, are still in safe territories like the capital Baghdad for now. President Park arrives in Uzbekistan to start a week-long tour of Central Asia to bolster strategic partnerships and boost economic ties. And a new pick for the nation's finance minister says he wants to ease regulations, especially in the housing sector, in a bid to update rules to reflect the current economic times. Primetime News begins now.
Happy Monday, everyone. Welcome to Primetime News. I'm Kantiri.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for joining us tonight. Well, President Park has arrived in Uzbekistan to start her week-long Central Asia tour to build ties and support large-scale ventures for Korean firms.
And that includes the promotion of her Eurasia Energy and Infrastructure Initiative. Our presidential office correspondent Choi Yoo-sun starts us off.
President Park has started her tour of Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan this week. In Tashkent, the Korean president and her Uzbek counterpart will seek ways to bolster their strategic partnership. There are currently some $8 billion worth of joint projects underway, such as a gas field development and chemical complex construction, and Seoul hopes to go beyond into areas of renewable energy and textiles. President Baku has proposed an initiative that would link energy and infrastructure in Eurasia, will also visit Samarkand, a city that was at the heart of the Silk Road. In Astana, the Korean leader and her Kazakh counterpart will discuss current projects worth roughly $10 million, including construction of a thermal plant and petrochemical complex. Seoul will sign a deal to participate in Astana's rail development, with hopes it will lay the groundwork for President Bak's Eurasia initiative. There will be talks on the North Korea nuclear issue since Kazakhstan achieved significant growth after voluntarily giving up its nuclear arms. President Park will be visiting Turkmenistan for the first time as a Korean leader, where she plans to ask the country to support Korean firms seeking to participate in large-scale infrastructure projects in the gas-rich nation. After President Park landed in the Uzbek capital several hours ago, President Islam Karimov escorted her to where she'll be staying for the next 3 days. Before the two leaders summit on Tuesday, President Park will also meet with Koreans as well as ethnic Koreans residing here to pledge her support for active cultural exchanges with the region. Choi Yoo-sun, Arirang News, Tashkent.
After apologizing for any misunderstandings his prior comments have caused, Prime Minister nominee Moon Chang-guk is not backing down to pressure from the main opposition party.
Kim Yong-gil has more on the battle lines being drawn over Moon's candid perspectives from the past.
A motion calling for parliamentary confirmation of the new Prime Minister nominee, Moon Chang-guk, will be submitted to the National Assembly on Tuesday. Once the request is filed, legislators have 20 days to vote on the appointment. The ruling Saenuri party has jumped to Moon's defense, saying he needs to be given a chance to be vetted through a confirmation hearing. Party spokesperson Park Dae-chul accused the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, or NPAD, of not giving Moon a chance.
The main opposition bloc is not even giving the nominee a chance to be questioned on stage. Not holding a confirmation hearing is anti-democratic and goes against the people's will.
The ruling party has attacked the opposition bloc, accusing it of using the controversy surrounding Moon to score political points. However, the NPAD, which has been concentrating fire on Moon's questionable comments regarding historical issues, continues to demand his withdrawal.
If Moon stays on, it will be an insult to the people, turn Korea into a pathetic nation, cast doubt on President Park's concept of a nation, and bring ridicule to the Saenuri party.
In a lecture delivered at his church a few years ago, Moon said Japan's colonization of Korea and the division of the Korean peninsula was all part of God's will. The National Assembly will hold a 3-day interpellation session starting Wednesday, signaling the start of June's extraordinary session. 김영길, Arirang News.
The Park Geun-hye administration has made deregulation one of the cornerstones of its plans to revive the Korean economy.
It stands to reason then that the president's pick to be her next finance minister should be on the same page. Our Kim Ji-yeon explains.
Finance Minister nominee Choi Kyung-won says one of his top priorities, if confirmed, will be to ease financial regulations. It's a pledge that falls right into the Park Geun-hye administration's drive toward deregulation in the financial sector and housing market. Choi compared the current situation in the housing market to the middle of winter, when people lack vitality and their activities dwindled to a minimum. The nominee says current regulations are not helping. Choi said they don't address the primary problems and that they were imposed years back when the market was flourishing. If approved by the National Assembly, Choi is expected to make a push to break down some of the barriers for home buyers, including those that put a limit on the amount of loans people can borrow from lenders, depending on their financial conditions.
In order to ease the burden for home buyers, I will ease loan-to-value and debt-to-income rules that are currently putting the brakes on the housing market.
Choi Kyung-won says the government's main focus should be on reviving the Korean economy and promoting the happiness of the people. He has so far refrained from commenting on the strengthening local currency, calling it a sensitive issue that must be dealt with more scrutiny. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
And to talk in depth about what our Kim Ji-yeon was just talking about in a report, the finance minister nominee himself and his policies, we have Professor Yang Jun-seok from Catholic University joining us right here in the studio. Welcome. Thanks for making time for us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Let's start off with the latest comments from the finance minister nominee himself on the housing market and deregulation part. What do you think about his wearing summer clothes in the wintertime comment?
Okay, well, I think regulations and laws should not be seasonal. I think they're very important to set up incentives for long-term growth. So it's not really a good idea to change them so much. Now, concerning the LTV and DTI regulation in particular, I think if the Korean financial institutions were working with market discipline, then I think LTV and DTI regulations are not really something that's required, so it's definitely a target for deregulation. But throughout the 2000s, we saw that sometimes the Korean financial institutions do not seem to be worried about having a large bad debt in their portfolios.
Well, let's talk about the president's pick for finance minister and for her senior secretary for economic policies. What strengths do they bring to the table, and how do they fit into this picture of deregulation?
Okay, Mr. Choi, I think, is a perfect person for President Park at this point because, well, there's a lot of gridlock between the National Assembly and the Blue House, and he served as a chief advisor to President Park, but he's also spent a lot of time as a National Assemblyman, so perhaps he could work around the gridlock. Also, President Park has been placing a lot of emphasis on creative, innovative economy, and Mr. Choi has been a minister of a knowledge economy during the time of Lee Myung-bak administration. I know that there's some people who are concerned with whether he will place too much emphasis on economic growth and not enough emphasis on economic democracy or income redistribution, but I think the candidate for the economic advisor in the Blue House is interested in that area, so I think they'll make a very good combination.
Well, let's talk about the foreign exchange, the issue. A lot of times, people have advocated a weak Korean won to boost the exports, to encourage the Korean economy. But then this new finance minister seemed to hint that that policy is not necessarily bearing a fruit, or the perception of it is not necessarily the right track to go. What do you think?
Okay, I think there's 3 points to be made here. First is that if you plot out the changes in exchange rate for the last 2 or 3 years, it's been on a downward trend. That is, won is definitely appreciating over time, but there's wide variation. There's a steady trend, but a large fluctuation around that trend. So that makes any kind of foreign exchange rate policy very difficult because you really don't you know where the rates are going in the long run, but you don't know where it's going to be a few weeks or a few months from now. As the global economy recovers, Korean exchange rate will hit below 1,000 won per dollar because, well, that's what happened before the global financial crisis and before the Asian financial crisis. So during the time when the global economy is stable, I think our steady rate is around 1,000 or slightly below 1,000 won per dollar. Some of the reports about the Korean economy that's been coming out in the last 2 or 3 years seems to say that the Korean exports are not as much affected by the exchange rate as it had been in the past.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Professor, for your time and insight tonight.
Thank you.
Curry's comments came in response to
your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Chae-ri from the heart of Seoul.
Begins now.
Primetime news, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
South Korea repatriated 5 North Korean fishermen who were rescued last Friday in a fishing boat that was sinking in waters near the South Korea-controlled Dokdo Island.
The Unification Ministry said Monday that the North Koreans ranging in age from their 20s to 40s were repatriated at around 4 p.m. Korea time through the truce village of Panmunjom. All 5 of them had said they wanted to return to the north. This comes a couple of weeks after 3 other North Korean fishermen were picked up in South Korean waters. Pyongyang demanded they all be returned, but South Korean authorities allowed 2 to stay behind per their request. South Korea's chief nuclear envoy Hwang Jun-guk left for Moscow on Monday for talks with his Russian counterpart Igor Morgulov on conditions for restarting the long-stalled 6-party talks.
Before departing, though, Hwang said Russia's stance is similar to China's in that it supports the swift resumption of the nuclear talks and said his planned visit with the Russian envoy on Wednesday is very timely. The multilateral dialogue aimed at ending North Korea's nuclear program involving the 2 Koreas, the U.S., China, Russia, and Japan, has been at a standstill for more than 5 years now. Hwang's first trip to Russia since taking office in April follows talks with his U.S. as well as Chinese counterparts earlier this month. In an effort to convince more global enterprises to set up headquarters right here in Korea, the government plans to provide a wide range of incentives to foreign investors.
The Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy said Monday that 40 days from now, measures like tax breaks and immigration benefits will take effect. And for all foreign employees at the global headquarters of enterprises that are based in Korea, the Korean government will impose an income tax rate of 17% regardless of income. Foreign engineers will be eligible for tax breaks of up to 50%, and the maximum visa duration will be extended to 5 years from the current 3. Fresh data provided by the CIA serves as a reminder that Korea has one of the lowest fertility rates among the world's advanced economies.
That's right. This can be another good reminder of how difficult and expensive to get married and raise kids in Korea. Our Connie Kim tells us more.
Low employment rates, smaller incomes, and difficulties finding places to live. It's a recipe that has resulted in Korea having one of the lowest fertility rates in the OECD. Data recently released by the World Factbook produced by the Central Intelligence Agency estimates Korea's total fertility rate at 1.25, which represents the number of children a mother is expected to have over her lifetime. Topping the list were the African countries of Niger, Mali, and Burundi. Israel, Mexico, and France had the highest rates among the OECD. Now, experts say the low birth rate in Korea comes from a combination of factors.
The low fertility rate can be seen among married couples and those who are not married. Among the unmarried, high youth unemployment rates and low incomes are the major reasons for putting off marriage. Among married couples, the financial hardships associated with raising kids act as a deterrent from getting pregnant.
Last year, 67% of the $14.1 billion spent by the Korean government on raising the nation's fertility rate was funneled into support for childcare. Yang says there is more that can be done.
In 2009, France poured in about 4% of its yearly budget to tackling the low birth rate, while Korea spent only about 1%.
Experts say the low birth rate will ultimately lead to a decrease in the working population, resulting in a slowdown in production and a reduction in consumption, which could bring down Korea's economic growth rate down to about 1.7% in the next 20 years. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Sunni-led insurgents who have rapidly taken over northern parts of Iraq have released photos that it looks like to show their fighters carrying out a massacre of Iraqi troops. With more on that, Paul E. is joining us from the News Center.
Paul, these photographs are extremely graphic and show hundreds of unarmed soldiers being executed, but do we know if they're authentic?
Well, an independent body has not yet confirmed the validity of the photos. However, an Iraqi military spokesman says they are authentic and appear to have taken place after the militants took over the city of Mosul. We warn you, some of the images you're about to see are disturbing. The photos were uploaded on Saturday on the militant website for the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIS. The Iraqi military said the images showed around 170 Iraqi troops who had been captured and killed. The Iraqi government has reinforced defenses around the capital. However, a series of suicide bombings inside the capital, Baghdad, killed over a dozen and left more than 40 injured. Meanwhile, Seoul's foreign ministry says all 1,300 or so South Korean nationals in Iraq are currently in regions that are considered relatively safe. The South Korean government has also formed a special task force to monitor the safety of its citizens in the country on a day-to-day basis. And as the violence in Iraq intensifies, the world is watching not only for the fate of the country, but also global oil prices. The escalating tensions in Iraq come as Western countries hit their peak seasonal demand. Iraq has the world's fourth largest oil reserves, with exports reaching 2.5 million barrels per day in April. Our Connie Lee has more.
The worsening crisis in Iraq is causing concerns in the international community about oil output and oil prices. At production of about 3.3 million barrels a day, Iraq is the world's second biggest oil producer, after Saudi Arabia, in the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC. And according to the International Energy Agency, the country accounts for roughly 4% of global oil production. Making matters worse, OPEC says that global consumption will increase sharply in the last quarter of 2014, and the organization plans to produce more to meet demands. Worries of a civil war breaking out in Iraq have startled markets and pushed the international benchmark to a 3-month high above $110 a barrel.
We are still very sensitive what goes on in the Middle East. There's no question that spills over, and that's reflected in the Brent price usually. And it's a global market, so everything is interrelated. So what goes on there affects us also.
Surging oil prices could also have an impact on Korea. According to the Korea National Oil Corporation, Iraq is the nation's 5th largest oil supplier, making up nearly 8% of its imports. The 100 or so Korean companies operating in Iraq are watching the turn of events closely. An emergency meeting in Seoul on Sunday, attended by the Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy, and officials from state-run and private sector firms, concluded that Korean companies in Iraq have not yet been affected by the unrest. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
And finally, Russia has halted gas supplies to Ukraine in a major escalation of tensions between the two countries. The massive energy shutdown comes as Moscow's Gazprom and the Ukrainian government failed to reach a new gas deal ahead of Monday's deadline. Gazprom said it also filed a lawsuit to recover Ukraine's outstanding debt of $4.5 billion. The gas giant, however, stressed that it would continue to supply European nations. Meanwhile, Kiev is refusing to pay its debts in protest of an 80% price hike. Ukraine's Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk said the gas dispute with Russia was part of what he called a plan to destroy Ukraine. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Che. Now the World Cup's first matches continue on. Day 4 featured a pair of Group E matches and a lone Group F match, all starting with Switzerland taking on Ecuador. Now the higher-ranked Swiss were pegged for the win, but Ecuador's Enner Valencia headed in the first goal to put his team up before the half. But a Mehmeti header leveled it up in the 48th minute and a miracle strike by Seferovic in second half stoppage time put the game away for Switzerland 2-1. And in the other Group E match, it was France versus Honduras. Now, both sides were at a deadlock until France's Paul Pogba was downed in the box, leading to a Karim Benzema goal before the half. Then it was more Benzema after the half, with a super strike forcing an own goal by the Ecuadorian keeper in the 48th minute. He added a dagger later on for his second score. France beat Ecuador 3-0. And finally, it was the first Group F match between Argentina and Bosnia-Herzegovina. And this one started with an own goal as well by the Bosnians, who were likely struck with the jitters of their first ever World Cup. Fast forward to the second half, a beautiful give and go and finish by Lionel Messi put Argentina up by double. Vedad Ibisevic slotted one late for Bosnia-Herzegovina, but Argentina held on to win 2-1. And for all the excitement and disappointment at the World Cup, sometimes it's just nice to sit back and look at all the numbers. And there were plenty of those to keep an eye on in Brazil. Now we go from the player with the most goals in World Cup history to the country that can boast the most appearances. We have Yurian telling us more.
It's every soccer player's dream to play in the World Cup, the most viewed sporting event in the world. Now, there was one player that played a staggering 25 matches in the World Cup, and that's German midfielder Lothar Matthäus. Now, the German legend with the most appearances in the World Cup took part in every World Cup between 1982 and 1998. Now, when it comes to Korea, Park Ji-sung is the country's unforgettable hero. Park scored the winning goal against Portugal at the 2002 World Cup at the age of just 21, making him the youngest Korean player to score a goal at a World Cup finals. Now, if there was a perfect attendance award given out for the World Cup, it would go to Brazil. Brazil is the only nation to have appeared in all 20 World Cups. The soccer-mad nation has also picked up the trophy a record 5 times. Now, Brazilian striker Ronaldo holds the record for the most number of goals scored, amassing 15 in 3 tournaments. Since his last World Cup in 2006, Ronaldo's record remains untouched, but that could change over the next month, as Germany's Miroslav Klose is just 1 goal behind. Soccer balls in previous World Cups have been criticized for being erratic. Now, this bazooka, the official ball for this year's tournament, is made up of just 6 panels, the smallest number of panels used for a soccer ball ever. With fewer stitches needed, experts are calling it the most stable and accurate ball ever. That does it for your look at the World Cup by the numbers.
Well, thank you, Leon, for that. And that's all we have for Primetime Sports. This has been Stephen Che. I'll see you back here later for more from the world of sports.
It's hard to talk about summer without monsoons, which will arrive in Jeju tomorrow.
Oh boy, and for more, we connect live to Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, how much rain are we talking about?
A pre-heavy rainfall watch has been issued for Jeju, and over 80 millimeters of precipitation is forecast for the mountainous regions of Jeju and elsewhere. 20 to 60 millimeters is forecast, so an umbrella is a must if you're down there. Monsoons in Jeju are a result of heavy clouds moving in over the southern regions, and other than that, tomorrow is shaping up to be mostly cloudy, but it won't be until later this month that the monsoons will hit the inland regions. On to Tuesday's readings. Seoul reaches 28 degrees while cloudy skies are forecast down south with a daytime high reaching the mid-20s. On to other places. Rainy Jeju hits 21 degrees while Dokdo and Mount Kumgang peak in the high teens. On Wednesday, Korea faces Russia in Brazil, and it looks to be cloudy there tomorrow, but the sun will make its way out with the high reaching 32 degrees on Wednesday, so the best of luck to all our players. That's your weather for this hour, and I'll be back with more after midnight.
Thanks, Po-kyung. And that does it for this Monday edition of Primetime News.
Good night or enjoy your day, depending on where you are. We'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.